The freezing rain at the Burlington cemetery felt warmer than the look in Linda's eyes as she handed Arthur the divorce papers right over his mother's fresh grave. The wind whipped off Lake Champlain, carrying the bite of late November, stinging Arthur's cheeks, but he barely felt it. He was too numb. He stood by the open earth, his shoes sinking into the freezing mud, watching the only person who had ever truly loved him disappear beneath the wet soil. "It's better this way, Arthur," Linda said, her voice competing with the sound of the rain hitting her black umbrella. She wasn't looking at the casket. She was looking at her phone, checking the time. "I didn't want to do this today, obviously. But my lawyer said we need to expedite the filing before the end of the fiscal year. Tax purposes." Tax purposes. Arthur looked at his wife. No, his ex-wife. She was immaculate in a black designer trench coat that probably cost more than the heating bill he hadn't paid for 3 months. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, untouched by the storm. In contrast, Arthur felt like a scarecrow in his thrift store suit, the fabric thin and fraying at the cuffs. He had lost 15 pounds in the last 2 months of his mother's hospice care, and the jacket hung off his shoulders like a shroud. "You're leaving," Arthur said. It wasn't a question. It was a dull realization, heavy as a stone. "I'm evolving," Linda corrected sharply, finally meeting his eyes. There was no pity there, only impatience. "Look at you, Arthur. You're 32 years old and you look 50. You've spent the last decade changing bedpans and dusting old books in that failing store. I want a life. I want to travel. I want more." She shoved the manila envelope against his chest. He took it instinctively. The paper was dry. His hands were soaking wet. "Robert is waiting," she added, turning away before he could respond. The name hit him harder than the divorce papers. Robert, his best friend from college. The man who had sat at this very graveside service 20 minutes ago, squeezing Arthur's shoulder, whispering about brotherhood. Arthur watched through the gray curtain of rain as Linda walked toward the cemetery gates. A sleek black Porsche Cayenne was idling there, its headlights cutting through the gloom. The window rolled down as Linda approached, and Arthur saw him. Robert Clayton. He sat inside the warm leather-clad interior, wearing a charcoal turtleneck and a look of practiced sympathy that didn't quite reach his eyes. Robert didn't get out of the car. He just leaned over and opened the passenger door for Linda. As she climbed in, shaking off her umbrella, Robert looked back at Arthur. He didn't wave. He just nodded, a small, tight gesture that was more a dismissal than a greeting. Then he drove away, the taillights of the Porsche blurring into red streaks against the gray afternoon, leaving Arthur alone with the gravediggers. The walk back to the bookstore took 40 minutes. Arthur didn't have money for a cab, and his old sedan had died a week ago, another casualty of his financial ruin. By the time he reached the timeless page, his teeth were chattering so hard his jaw ached. The sign above the door flickered weakly. Open. But it wasn't really open. It hadn't been truly open for business in months. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. The bell chimed, a cheerful sound that felt mocking in the silence. The air inside was stale and cold. The landlord had cut the central heating 2 days ago. Arthur could see his breath puffing out in small white clouds as he walked past the rows of unsold classics and second-hand paperbacks. He climbed the creaky stairs to his apartment above the shop. If the store was cold, the apartment was a freezer. He stripped off his wetsuit jacket and hung it carefully on the back of a chair. It was the only suit he owned. He pulled on a thick wool sweater that smelled faintly of lavender, his mother's detergent. The scent broke him. He sat on the edge of his mattress, the divorce papers still clutched in his hand. He looked around the room. A hot plate in the corner. A stack of unpaid medical bills on the counter. A half-empty box of instant noodles. And in his wallet. He checked just to torture himself. $42. That was it. That was the sum total of his life at 32. "You were a fool, Artie," he whispered to the empty room. His voice cracked. Everyone else was building a career. Everyone else was investing. You were just... Here. He thought about Robert's warm car. He thought about Linda's pristine coat. They were the winners. They had played the game correctly. They had put themselves first. Arthur had put his mother first, and now she was gone and he was nothing. A loser with a dead mother, a dead marriage, and a dying business. The unfairness of it rose up in his throat like bile. He had done everything right. He had been kind. He had been loyal. And his reward was freezing to death in a room that didn't even belong to him anymore. He curled forward, burying his face in his hands. The tears finally came, hot and fast, shaking his thin frame. He cried for the wasted years. He cried for the love he thought he had. He cried because he was terrified of the silence that stretched out before him, endless and cold. He was completely, utterly alone in a world that measured worth in gold, and he had none. He was just about to let the darkness swallow him completely when a sharp sound cut through the room. Bep, bep, bep. It was a heavy, authoritative knock on the downstairs door. Not a customer. Customers didn't knock like that. Not a neighbor. It sounded official. Arthur wiped his face with his sleeve, sniffing. He ignored it. It was probably the sheriff serving the eviction notice Robert had threatened. Or a debt collector. He didn't have the energy to face another executioner today. Bup, bup, bup. Louder this time. Persistent. Arthur groaned and dragged himself up. He walked down the stairs, his footsteps heavy on the wood. He unlocked the front door and pulled it open, bracing himself for bad news. Standing on the snowy doormat was a short, stout man in a uniform Arthur didn't recognize. He held a clipboard in one hand and a thick leather satchel in the other. He wasn't a sheriff. He looked like a private courier, the expensive kind. "Arthur Penhaligon?" the man asked. "Yes," Arthur croaked. "Identification, please." Arthur fumbled for his wallet and showed his license. The man checked it carefully, nodded, and then reached into his satchel. "I have a priority delivery for you. Requires a signature. Chain of custody is strictly monitored." Arthur signed the digital pad, his hand trembling slightly from the cold. The courier handed him a package. It wasn't a standard cardboard envelope. It was heavy, made of thick, cream-colored linen paper, and sealed with red wax on the back. The return address was embossed in gold leaf. Thorne and Samuel, attorneys at law. "Good day, sir," the courier said, tipping his cap before turning back into the storm. Arthur stood in the open doorway, snowflakes drifting onto the heavy envelope in his hands. He stared at the red wax seal. It looked like something from another century. Below the address, stamped in bold red ink, was a single word. Urgent. A knock at the door interrupts his despair. It's a courier from Thorne and Samuel, attorneys at law, delivering a heavy wax-sealed envelope marked urgent. If you are still watching and feeling the weight of Arthur's struggle, please comment the number 8 below to let me know you are here with us. And if you haven't joined our community yet, I highly recommend subscribing to Black Brilliance and turning on the notification bell so you never miss a moment of the justice to come. Your support helps us continue creating great content to inform and inspire you every day. Now, let's open that envelope and continue. The office of Samuel Thorne smelled of old mahogany, pipe tobacco, and secrets, a stark contrast to the drafty, dust-filled bookstore Arthur had just left. The room was a sanctuary against the Vermont winter, insulated by walls lined with leather-bound legal volumes and thick velvet drapes that shut out the gray afternoon. A grandfather clock ticked rhythmically in the corner, a slow, steady heartbeat that seemed to measure time differently here, not in minutes but in generations. Arthur sat on the edge of a wingback chair, his hands wrapped around a porcelain cup of hot Earl Grey tea. He still wore his damp sweater, feeling painfully underdressed across from Mr. Samuel. The attorney was 75, a man of sharp eyes and sharper suits, known in Burlington as the gatekeeper of the town's oldest fortunes. "I imagine you are confused, Arthur," Mr. Samuel said softly, setting a file on the heavy oak desk. "You're wondering why a struggling bookstore owner is sitting in the most expensive law firm in the state. I assume it's about Mom's debts, Arthur said, staring into his tea. The hospital bills. The funeral costs. Hey. I don't have much, Mr. Samuel, but I intend to pay everything. I just need time. Mr. Samuel smiled, a cryptic expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Debts? No, Arthur. Your mother didn't have debts. She had foresight. The lawyer pressed a button on a sleek remote. A panel in the bookshelf slid open to reveal a screen. She wanted to tell you this herself. We recorded this 3 weeks ago, on the day you went to pick up her pain medication. The screen flickered to life. Arthur's breath caught in his throat. It was his mother, Rosemary. She looked frail, sitting in her hospital bed, but her eyes, those intelligent, piercing blue eyes, were clear. She wasn't wearing her hospital gown. She was wearing her favorite silk scarf. "Hello, my sweet boy." Rosemary's voice filled the quiet room. Arthur felt tears prick his eyes again. "If you're watching this, I'm gone, and you're probably sitting there in your old sweater, worrying about how to pay for my casket. Stop it. Breathe." On screen she smiled. "You know me as a nurse, Arthur. You know I worked double shifts at the medical center for 40 years. What you don't know is what I did with my lunch breaks. In 1982, I met a young researcher crying in the cafeteria because he couldn't get funding for a new type of surgical stent. I gave him $5,000. My entire savings at the time. Everyone told me I was crazy. That company is now MedTech Global." Arthur blinked. MedTech Global was a giant. Their headquarters dominated the skyline in Boston. "I didn't stop there," Rosemary continued. "I realized I had a talent for spotting people. Not numbers but people. I invested in dreamers. I bought patents. I quietly acquired commercial real estate in neighborhoods before they became trendy. I built a portfolio, Arthur. A silent empire." Mr. Samuel paused the video. He slid a thick document across the desk. It was a balance sheet. Arthur looked at the bottom line. He squinted, thinking he misread the zeros. $312 million, Mr. Samuel clarified gently. "As of this morning's market close. You are the sole beneficiary. Effective immediately." The room spun. Arthur gripped the armrests of the chair. This is a mistake. We lived in a 2-bedroom rental. She clipped coupons. She drove a 20-year-old Honda. Mr. Samuel pressed play again. "I know you're angry I didn't tell you." Rosemary's voice returned, softer now. "But I watched you, Arthur. Especially these last 10 years. I watched your friends like Robert chase money and lose their souls. I watched your wife, Linda, look at price tags before she looked at people. I needed to protect you. I needed to know you would become the man who stayed when it was hard, not just when it was easy. You sacrificed your 20s to care for a dying old woman. You proved your character. Now you have the means to change the world." She leaned closer to the camera. "But wealth is dangerous, Arthur. It attracts wolves. So I have one condition. A period of silence. For the next 90 days, you cannot tell a soul about this inheritance. Not Linda. Not Robert. No one. Let them believe you are destitute. Money reveals character, son. Let them show you who they really are when they think you are nothing. Only then will you know who deserves a place at your table." The screen went black. The silence in the office was deafening. Arthur stared at the blank monitor. 300 million. He could buy the cemetery. He could buy the hospital. He could buy Robert's precious Porsche and crush it into a cube just for sport. "Here," Mr. Samuel said, sliding a small black box across the desk. Inside was a heavy matte black credit card. "The Centurion. It's linked to your trust. No limit. But remember the condition: discretion. If you flash this around, the wolves will circle before you're ready." Arthur took the card. Felt cold and heavy like a weapon. He left the office 20 minutes later, stepping back out into the biting wind of downtown Burlington. But something had changed. The wind didn't feel as sharp. The world didn't feel as crushing. He walked down Church Street, the holiday lights blurring in the twilight. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Linda. "Please move your boxes out by Friday. Robert needs the space for his renovation team. Don't make this hard." He stared at the screen. Yesterday, this text would have sent him into a panic. He would have begged. He would have asked for more time. He would have felt the crushing weight of his own failure. Now, he looked at the text and felt nothing. No, not nothing. He felt a strange, detached calmness. Like he was watching a child throw a tantrum from behind a soundproof glass wall. He typed back, "Noted." He slipped the phone into his pocket, his fingers brushing against the cool metal of the black card. As he walked, he passed Gentlemen's Quarters, the most exclusive haberdashery in town. In the window, a mannequin wore a charcoal wool suit, Italian cut, impeccable. It was exactly the kind of suit Robert would wear to intimidate people. The price tag was discreetly placed. $4,800. Arthur stopped. He caught his reflection in the glass. Shabby, hunched, wearing a coat that was 2 sizes too big. He could walk in there right now. He could buy that suit. He could buy the whole store. He could walk into Robert's office wearing it and throw the divorce papers in his face. The urge burned in his chest, hot and intoxicating. He wanted to see their faces. He wanted the satisfaction now. Then he heard his mother's voice. "Let them show you who they really are." If he bought the suit, he was just playing their game. He was just another rich guy in a costume. Arthur turned away from the window. He walked a few steps further and saw a man sitting on a flattened cardboard box near the bus stop. It was old Jerry, a Vietnam vet who had been a fixture in Burlington for years. Jerry was shivering, wrapped in a thin blanket. Arthur walked into the deli next door. He ordered 2 large hot soups, 2 turkey sandwiches, and a large coffee. He paid with the crumpled $40 from his wallet. His last money. He went outside and sat on the curb next to Jerry. "Hungry?" Arthur asked. Jerry looked at him with suspicious, watery eyes. "I ain't got cash, kid." "On the house," Arthur said, handing him the food. "I had a good day." They ate in silence as the snow began to fall again. For the first time in years, Arthur didn't feel poor. He realized he had been rich long before he got the money, because he still knew how to share when he had nothing. But the peace didn't last. Arthur returned to the timeless page an hour later, ready to pack a few boxes and plan his next move. As he approached the storefront, he saw something taped to the glass door. A bright orange piece of paper that stood out violently against the dark interior. He stepped closer. It was a legal document. Notice to vacate. Pursuant to Clause 14B of the Commercial Lease Agreement regarding structural instability, the property owner, Clayton Developments LLC, hereby exercises the right to terminate tenancy effective immediately for emergency demolition preparation. Arthur ripped the paper off the glass. Structural instability. 'Twas a lie. The building was old, but it was solid as a rock. Robert hadn't just asked to buy. He'd found a legal loophole in the old lease to force Arthur out within 48 hours. Arthur crumpled the notice in his fist, the paper crinkling loudly in the quiet street. He looked up at the darkened windows of his apartment. Robert wasn't just kicking him out. He was trying to erase him. He wanted Arthur gone, buried and forgotten, just like the books inside. Arthur reached into his pocket and touched the black card again. "Okay, Robert," he whispered into the cold night air. "You want to play by the rules. Let's play." He returns to the bookstore to find an official eviction notice taped to the glass. Robert hasn't just asked to buy. He's found a legal loophole in the old lease to force Arthur out within 48 hours. The sound of a construction drill next door woke Arthur. The sound of Robert's empire expanding, threatening to swallow Arthur's small sanctuary whole. The vibration rattled the single-pane windows of his apartment, shaking dust from the ceiling like dry snow. It was 7 a.m. on a Tuesday, but for Clayton Developments, greed didn't have a snooze button. Arthur sat up, pulling his thin quilt tighter around his shoulders. The radiator was still stone cold. He could see his breath in the air. Down on the street, the beeping of heavy machinery was relentless. Beep, 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 the heartbeat of what Robert called progress and what Arthur called erasure. He dressed quickly in layers, thermal shirt, flannel, and his frayed hoodie. He went downstairs to the shop floor. The smell of old paper and dust usually comforted him, but today it smelled like anxiety. Through the front window, he saw a commotion next door at Sunrise Bakery. Mrs. Gable was outside, wiping her eyes with her apron. A for lease sign was being hammered into the brickwork above her shop by two men in yellow vests. Arthur opened the door, the bell chiming softly. He stepped out into the slush. Mrs. Gable. The elderly woman turned. She was 70, with flour always dusted in her gray hair and a smell of yeast and vanilla that had been a part of this street for 40 years. She looked small and defeated. "Oh, Arthur," she sniffled, clutching a cardboard box. "It's over. I have to be out by noon." "Noon?" Arthur frowned. "I thought your lease ran until March." "Robert Clayton bought the building's mortgage yesterday," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He exercised a renovation clause. He tripled the rent effective immediately." "Tripled? Who can pay $6,000 for a bakery?" "He knows I can't. He wants me gone so he can knock the wall down and expand his lobby." Arthur felt a heat rise in his chest that had nothing to do with the temperature. It wasn't just him. Robert was clear-cutting the entire neighborhood, treating people like weeds in his garden of glass and steel. Just then, the door to the bakery kicked open. Robert Clayton stepped out, wearing a gleaming white Canada Goose parka and a Bluetooth headset blinking in his ear. He looked like an astronaut exploring a primitive planet. "It's just business, Mrs. G," Robert said loudly, tapping on his phone. "Market rates are market rates. You should have pivoted to online sales years ago. Adapt or die." He spotted Arthur and grinned, a wide, predatory flash of veneers. He clicked off his call and strolled over, his expensive boots crunching in the snow. "Morning, Artie. Sleep well. Heard the drill. Sorry about the noise, but you know what they say. Gotta break a few eggs to build an omelet." "She's been here 40 years, Robert," Arthur said, his voice low. "She fed us cookies when we were kids. You used to beg her for the cinnamon ends." Robert waved a dismissive hand. "Nostalgia doesn't pay the bills, buddy. Speaking of which." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a check. He held it out to Arthur with 2 fingers. "Here. $5,000. Relocation fee. I don't have to give you this legally. The eviction notice stands. But hey, we're brothers, right? Consider it a severance package for our friendship. Get yourself a studio apartment. Or a warm coat." Arthur looked at the check. $5,000. It was an insult. It was a crumb swept off the table of a glutton. Arthur took the check. Robert smirked, expecting gratitude. Then, slowly and deliberately, Arthur tore the check in half, then in quarters. He let the pieces fall into the slush at Robert's feet. "I don't want your charity, Robert. And I'm not leaving." Robert's smile vanished. His eyes went flat and hard. "You're an idiot, Arthur. You always were. You think being noble pays off. Look around. I'm winning. You're freezing. The sheriff will be here on Monday morning to drag you out. Don't blame me when you're sleeping under a bridge." Robert turned on his heel and marched back toward his construction crew, barking orders. Arthur gently took Mrs. Gable's arm. "Go inside, Mrs. Gable. Make some tea. Don't pack another box." "But Arthur, the rent." "Just wait," Arthur said. "Trust me." He went back into his bookstore and locked the door. His heart was hammering against his ribs. He went to the back office, a windowless room piled high with inventory lists. He pulled out his burner phone, the one Mr. Samuel had given him for secure communication. He dialed the number. Rang once. "Mr. Penhaligon." Samuel's voice was calm and instant. "I want to make a purchase," Arthur said. "Very good. A property? A stock?" "No," Arthur said, staring at the wall where a photo of him and Robert from college used to hang. I want to buy debt. Clarify, Samuel said, his tone sharpening with interest. Robert Clayton. Clayton Developments. He's expanding too fast. He's leveraged everything to build this small project. I overheard him bragging about bridge loans a month ago. Find out who holds his commercial loans. Find out who holds the mortgage on Mrs. Gable's building and my building. You want to buy the buildings? No, Arthur said coldly. I want to buy the notes. I want to be the bank. I want to own his debt. Can we do that? There was a pause on the line. Then he heard the faint scratch of a pen. Clayton's financing is likely through Vermont Heritage Bank. They are currently overexposed on commercial real estate. If we offer to buy his distressed debt at full face value, they would hand it over with a bow on top. It would cost you roughly $12 million. Do it, Arthur said. Today. Before the banks close. Sir, Samuel warned, if you own the debt, you don't own the property. You just own the right to collect payments. I know, Arthur said. And I know Robert. He lives paycheck to paycheck on a massive scale. He misses payments constantly because he thinks he's untouchable. If I own the note, and he misses a payment, you can foreclose, Samuel finished. Immediately. Without a court order. Buy it, Arthur said. He hung up. His hands were shaking, not from cold, but from adrenaline. He wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was hunting. The bell above the door jingled again. Arthur walked out, expecting Mrs. Gable. Instead, it was Linda. She stood in the center of the dusty aisle, looking out of place in her stiletto boots. She was holding a cardboard box. I came for my shoes, she said, not looking at him. And my winter coats. They were in the closet. Take them, Arthur said. She walked past him, smelling of expensive perfume and Robert's car leather. She packed her things quickly, efficiently. As she walked back to the door, she paused and looked out the window at Mrs. Gable's bakery. The for lease sign was crooked in the wind. Sad about the bakery, Linda said, adjusting her scarf. But honestly, that place was a health hazard. Robert says he's going to put a high-end juice bar there. It'll raise the property values for everyone. You should be grateful. Arthur looked at the woman he had married. He searched her face for a trace of the girl who used to volunteer at the animal shelter, the girl who cried during sad movies. She was gone. Or maybe she had never existed. Mrs. Gable is losing her livelihood, Linda. She's 70. Linda shrugged. Adapt or die, Arthur. That's the world now. You can't save everyone just because you feel bad for them. That's why you're here, and Robert is. Well, Robert, is that why you left? Arthur asked quietly. Because I didn't adapt. I left because I didn't want to drown with you, she said, her voice icy. She opened the door. Goodbye, Arthur. She walked out to the curb where Robert was waiting. Arthur watched them through the glass. They were perfect together. Two sharks swimming in a tank they thought they owned. Suddenly, the door flew open again. Robert burst in, grinning manic energy. He didn't even look at Arthur. He just slapped two heavy, cream-colored envelopes onto the counter near the cash register. Almost forgot. Robert boomed. Come to the Winter Gala on Saturday, Artie. Hotel Vermont. Black tie. We're announcing the Clayton Center Mall project officially. The mayor will be there. Investors. The press. He leaned in, his cologne overpowering the smell of old books. I want you there, Robert whispered, his eyes gleaming with cruelty. I want you to see what real success looks like. I want you to see what you could have had if you had just tried harder. Bring a date. Oh wait, you don't have anyone. Robert laughed, a sharp bark of a sound, and turned to leave. Arthur stared at the gold-embossed invitations. The future of Burlington. He picked one up. The paper was expensive. I'll be there, Robert, Arthur said to the empty room. He touched his pocket, where the black Centurion card sat warm against his hip. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Robert bursts back in, grinning, holding 2 invitations. Come to the Winter Gala on Saturday, Artie. We're announcing the new mall project. Bring your... Oh wait, you don't have anyone. Arthur has made his move, and the trap is set. If you are still watching and finding value in these hidden details, please comment the number 3 below to let me know you are here with us. And if you haven't already, I highly recommend subscribing to Black Brilliance and turning on the notification bell so you don't miss a single moment of the justice to come. Your support is what helps us continue creating great content to inform and inspire you every day. Now, let's continue. The grand ballroom of the Hotel Vermont glittered with crystal chandeliers and fake smiles, a perfect habitat for Robert and Linda's ambition. Waiters in white gloves drifted through the crowd carrying trays of champagne, navigating a sea of tuxedos and sequined gowns. The air smelled of expensive perfume and desperation, the specific kind of desperation found in small cities where everyone is trying to prove they've made it to the big leagues. Arthur stood near a potted fern in the far corner, holding a glass of sparkling water. He felt like an intruder in his own life. He was wearing his only suit, the black funeral suit from 3 days ago, but he had pressed the shirt himself and polished his worn shoes until they shone. Around him, men his age were discussing crypto portfolios and ski trips to Aspen. They looked at Arthur, saw the fraying cuffs of his jacket, and looked away, their eyes sliding off him like he was furniture. He adjusted his tie. It was a simple navy silk tie, the same one he had worn to his high school prom 14 years ago. He remembered Mrs. Gable's words from the eviction. They don't see us, Arthur. Tonight, he thought, touching the heavy card in his pocket. Tonight they will. Across the room, standing under a massive banner that read Clayton Developments, building tomorrow, was Robert. He looked like a prince in a midnight blue velvet tuxedo. He held a microphone in one hand and a scotch in the other, his face flushed with triumph and alcohol. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert's voice boomed over the speakers, silencing the jazz band. Thank you for coming to celebrate the future. When I started Clayton Developments 3 years ago, people said downtown Burlington was dead. They said retail was dead. But look at us now. Applause rippled through the room. Robert basked in it. Beside him stood Linda. She wore a silver gown that clung to her like liquid metal. She was smiling, but Arthur knew that smile. It was tight at the edges. He watched as she tried to engage the wife of the mayor, a woman in pearls who nodded politely at Linda before turning her back to talk to someone more important. Linda's smile faltered, her eyes darting around the room, terrified of being exposed as an outsider. We are clearing out the old rot to make way for the new, Robert shouted, gesturing to a projection screen. It showed a rendering of a gleaming glass shopping complex. The Clayton Center will replace the crumbling buildings on Main Street, specifically the old bakery and that dusty bookstore nobody visits anymore. Laughter. Few people chuckled. Arthur didn't flinch. He took a sip of water. In fact, Robert continued, scanning the crowd, his eyes locking onto Arthur in the corner. A cruel grin spread across his face. We have a special guest tonight. My old college roommate, Arthur Penhaligon. Artie, get over here. Let's get a spotlight on him. The beam of light swung across the room and blinded Arthur. The crowd turned. Hundreds of eyes assessed him instantly. The cheap suit, the tired face, the glass of water. Artie here is the owner of the Timeless page, Robert announced, his voice dripping with mock affection. He's a sentimental guy. Doesn't understand that you can't pay a mortgage with poetry, right, Artie? But hey, he's a good sport for coming tonight to celebrate his eviction. The room went silent. It was too mean even for this crowd. Linda looked down at her shoes, her face burning red. She knew this was wrong, but she said nothing. She did nothing. Arthur stood still in the harsh light. He didn't look angry. He didn't look humiliated. He just looked patient. He raised his glass slightly in a toast to Robert, a gesture of such quiet dignity that the laughter died in people's throats. Robert frowned, annoyed that Arthur wasn't crying or storming out. He opened his mouth to deliver another insult when a ripple of murmurs started at the ballroom entrance. The heavy double doors swung open. The manager of the hotel rushed forward, bowing low. Walking into the room was a man in his 60s, dressed not in a tuxedo, but in a simple gray wool sweater and dark jeans. He had wild white hair and walked with a cane, but the energy around him was electric. It was Elias Thorne. The gasp in the room was audible. Elias Thorne was the recluse billionaire of Vermont, the founder of Thorne Dynamics. He hadn't been seen at a public event in 5 years. He was old money and new tech combined, a man who could buy this entire hotel with the change in his couch cushions. Robert's eyes widened. He practically shoved Linda aside to get off the stage. This was his chance. If he could get a photo with Thorne, his funding problems were solved. "Mr. Thorne," Robert called out, rushing through the crowd, his hand extended. "Robert Clayton, Clayton Developments. What an honor. I didn't know you were coming. Please come up to the stage, I'd love to show you the renderings for." Elias Thorne stopped. He looked at Robert's outstretched hand. Then he looked at Robert's velvet tuxedo. He looked at him with the mild curiosity one might have for a noisy insect. "I'm not here for cartoons, Mr. Clayton," Elias said. His voice was quiet, but in the silent ballroom, it carried like a gunshot. Elias walked right past Robert. He didn't shake his hand. He didn't even slow down. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Elias walked straight through the center of the room, heading toward the back corner, toward the spotlight that was still lingering there. He stopped in front of Arthur. "Mr. Penhaligon?" Elias asked, removing his flat cap. Arthur nodded slowly. "Mr. Thorne." "Your mother," Elias said, his voice thickening with emotion, "was the only person who believed in my first patent in 1985. She gave me $5,000 when every bank in this city laughed at me. She made me tea in her kitchen and told me to keep going." Arthur swallowed the lump in his throat. "She liked your tea, sir. Earl Grey, double bergamot." Elias smiled, a genuine warm expression that transformed his face. "She had excellent taste. She spoke of you often. She told me you were a man of substance." Elias turned, looking at the stunned room, then back at Arthur. It seems she was right. It takes a lot of spine to stand alone in a room full of peacocks. "I'd be honored," Elias continued, gesturing to the VIP balcony that had been reserved for the mayor, "if you would join my table. We have much to discuss regarding the future of this town." Arthur placed his empty water glass on a passing tray. "I'd like that, Elias." They walked together toward the balcony. As they passed Robert, who was still standing with his hand extended in the empty air, Arthur didn't look at him. But Elias paused. He looked at Robert, then at Linda. "You two are quite loud," Elias said simply. "Money screams, wealth whispers. You might want to learn the difference." Then they were gone, ascending the stairs to the private section. The gala continued, but the energy had shifted violently. The elites in the room suddenly weren't looking at Robert. They were looking up at the balcony, where the richest man in the state was pouring tea for the guy in the thrift store suit. Linda stood frozen. She looked at Robert, who was chugging his scotch with trembling hands. She looked up at Arthur, who was laughing at something Elias said. For the first time, she saw the gap between the two men not as financial, but as something deeper. Robert looked small. Arthur looked immense. The party wound down 2 hours later. Arthur retrieved his old wool coat from the check room. As he turned to leave, a hand slammed against the wall next to his head. It was Robert. His tie was crooked, his eyes bloodshot with rage and humiliation. "You think you're funny," Robert hissed, smelling of stale whiskey. "You think because you shared a sob story with Thorne you're safe?" Arthur buttoned his coat calmly. "Go home, Robert. You're drunk." "I don't know what con you're pulling, Artie," Robert snarled, leaning in close, spittle flying from his lips. "But it changes nothing. Have the permits, Have the crew. The demolition team arrives at your store on Monday at 8 a.m. I'm going to crush that building into dust, and I'm going to enjoy watching you pick through the rubble. Arthur looked at his former friend. He felt the phone in his pocket. The confirmation email from Mr. Samuel regarding the debt purchase had arrived 10 minutes ago. I'll see you on Monday, Robert, Arthur said softly. Make sure you wear a helmet. Arthur walked out into the snowy night, leaving Robert shouting at his back. As the valet brought Robert's Porsche around, Arthur began the long walk home. He didn't mind the cold tonight. He checked his watch. 36 hours until Monday morning. 36 hours until the hammer dropped. As the gala ends, Robert corners Arthur in the coatroom, his face red with jealousy. I don't know what con you're pulling, Artie, but the demolition crew arrives at your store on Monday at 8 a.m. Nothing stops that. Monday morning dawned with a roar of diesel engines. The yellow bulldozers looked like prehistoric beasts hungry for Arthur's little bookstore. The heavy machinery idled on the street, spewing gray exhaust into the pristine falling snow, the vibrations rattling the windows of the entire block. It was 7:55 a.m. 5 minutes to execution. Arthur stood on the sidewalk, not in his usual spot inside the shop, but right at the edge of the police tape Robert had erected. He was wearing his old wool coat, holding a single thin manila folder against his chest. He looked small against the backdrop of the giant machines, but he stood with a stillness that unsettled the neighbors gathered behind him. A small crowd had formed, mostly elderly regulars, led by Mrs. Gable. They held hastily made signs that read "Save Our History" and "People Over Profit." They looked cold and frightened, huddling together as the foreman of the demolition crew checked his watch. "Clear the area," the foreman shouted, his voice cracking over the rumble of the engines. "We have a permit to commence structural removal at 8 o'clock hours." Robert Clayton was pacing near the lead bulldozer, wearing a pristine white hard hat that looked like it had never seen a day of work. He held a travel mug of coffee, looking energized, manic. He spotted the protesters and rolled his eyes, marching over to the police tape. "Go home," Robert shouted, waving his free hand. "The show's over, folks. Go bake some cookies, Mrs. Gable. This is progress. This block belongs to the future now." He turned his gaze to Arthur. The smirk returned, sharp and vicious. "Last chance to grab anything from inside, Artie. I told the boys to start with the front wall. Glass flies everywhere. Might want to stand back." Arthur didn't move. "You don't have to do this, Robert. Mrs. Gable has nowhere to go. The community needs this place. The community needs a juice bar and a parking garage," Robert sneered, checking his Rolex. "It's 7:58. You had your chance to sell. You wanted to be a martyr. Congratulations. Now you're a martyr with no building." He turned to the foreman and raised his thumb. "Rev it up. Let's tear it down." The foreman pulled a lever. The engine of the lead bulldozer screamed, the giant metal bucket lifting into the air, casting a shadow over Arthur. Mrs. Gable screamed. Linda, watching from the heated passenger seat of Robert's Porsche parked safely across the street, looked away, unable to watch the destruction. Arthur didn't flinch. He didn't look at the bulldozer. He looked down the street. "Wait," Arthur said calmly. "Too late." Robert yelled over the noise. "No," Arthur said, his voice cutting through the cold air. "Wait for him." A sleek black Lincoln Town car turned the corner, flanked by a sheriff's cruiser with its lights flashing silently. The convoy moved slowly, purposefully, sliding to a halt right in front of the demolition zone. The bulldozer engine idled down as the foreman hesitated. Robert frowned. "What is this? I have the permits. Who called the cops?" The rear door of the town car opened. Mr. Samuel stepped out. He moved with the slow, terrifying grace of an old predator. He adjusted his scarf, picked up a leather briefcase, and walked straight toward Robert. The sheriff followed close behind. "Robert Clayton?" Mr. Samuel asked, his voice gravelly. Yeah, I'm Clayton, Robert said, puffing out his chest. I have a demolition permit signed by the city. If you're here to protest, you're on private property. I am not here to protest, Mr. Samuel said. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a document stamped with a red court seal. I am here to serve a cease and desist order regarding the property at 42 Main Street and 44 Main Street. Robert laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. On what grounds? I own the buildings. I bought the mortgages. You hold the deed, yes, Mr. Samuel said politely. But you financed those purchases through commercial loans with Vermont Heritage Bank. Loans that were heavily leveraged against your other assets. So what? I pay the bank, Robert snapped. Get out of my way. Actually, you don't, Arthur spoke up. Arthur stepped forward, ducking under the police tape. He walked until he was standing toe-to-toe with Robert. You missed 3 payments last quarter, Robert, Arthur said quietly. You told the bank manager it was a cash flow timing issue, because you were overextended on the mall project. You technically defaulted on November 1st, but the bank was too busy to process the paperwork. Robert's face went pale. How? How do you know that? That's confidential financial information. It was confidential, Arthur agreed. He opened his manila folder. Until Friday afternoon. What did you do? Robert whispered. I bought the debt, Arthur said. The words hung in the frozen air. I don't understand, Robert stammered. Rosemary Holdings LLC purchased your distressed debt portfolio from Vermont Heritage Bank on Friday at 4:55 p.m., Arthur explained, his voice devoid of emotion. I own your loans, Robert. I own the note on this building. I own the note on Mrs. Gable's bakery. I own the note on your shiny new mall project. And because you are in default. Arthur pulled a paper from the folder and handed it to Robert. I am exercising the acceleration clause. I am calling in the full value of the loans. $32 million. Due immediately. Robert stared at the paper. His hands shook so badly the coffee in his mug splashed onto his white boots. Hey, I can't pay $32 million. Not today. I need time. I have investors. You have nothing, Arthur said coldly. If you cannot pay the full amount by 5 p.m., I am initiating immediate foreclosure proceedings on all collateral, including this site, including your equipment, including that Porsche across the street. Arthur turned to the sheriff. Sheriff, as the lien holder of this property, I did not authorize any demolition. This is vandalism. The sheriff stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt. Mr. Clayton, tell your men to power down. Or you'll be leaving in the back of my car. Robert dropped the hard hat. It tumbled into the slush, rolling to Arthur's feet. The symbol of his power, now just a piece of dirty plastic. Arthur, Robert choked out, tears of panic welling in his eyes. Artie, please. We're friends. We're brothers. You can't do this. You'll ruin me. I'm not ruining you, Robert, Arthur said. You ruined yourself. You spent money you didn't have to destroy things you didn't understand. I'm just balancing the books. Across the street, the door of the Porsche opened. Linda stepped out. She had been watching. She had seen the sheriff. She had seen Robert drop the hat. She saw the lawyer standing next to Arthur. Arthur, who suddenly wasn't the loser in the old coat, but the man holding the folder that controlled their entire world. She didn't run to Robert. She didn't check on her husband. She walked straight toward Arthur. She navigated the slush carefully in her boots, her eyes locked on Arthur's face. She put on a smile, not the tight fake smile from the funeral, but a soft, trembling one. The one she used to use when she wanted him to forgive her for overspending. Arthur, she breathed, stopping a few feet away. She ignored Robert completely. Arthur, my God. You saved the bookstore. I knew you would. I told Robert he was wrong to push you. I told him. She reached out a hand to touch his arm. This is incredible. You own the loans. That means you're in charge now. We can fix this. We can talk about the bakery. I always loved that bakery. Arthur looked at her hand. Then he looked at her face. It was amazing, he thought. She really believed she could just walk back across the street. She thought the distance between them was just a stretch of asphalt, not a universe of betrayal. Linda, Arthur said. I'm here, Arthur, she said, her voice dropping to a seductive whisper. I made a mistake. I was confused. Robert. He manipulated me. But I see now. I see who the real man is. She took a step closer, ready to cross the final line. Arthur looked at her with a look of absolute, terrifying clarity. Don't take another step, Linda, he said. His voice wasn't angry. It was final. You made your choice at the cemetery. You chose the car. You chose the coat. You chose the easy way. But, Arthur, I love you. No, Arthur shook his head. You love survival. And right now I look like a life raft. But this boat has sailed. He turned his back on her. He turned his back on Robert, who was sobbing into his hands. He looked at Mrs. Gable, who was staring at him like he was an angel sent from above. Mrs. Gable, Arthur said softly. Why don't you go unlock the bakery? I think the boys could use some coffee. It's going to be a long morning of paperwork. Arthur looks at Linda approaching him with a relieved smile and says coldly, Don't take another step, Linda. You made your choice at the cemetery. He turns his back on them. The silence in the bookstore on Christmas Eve was no longer the silence of emptiness, but the peace of safety. Outside, the Burlington snow fell in thick, gentle sheets, coating the world in white, but inside the timeless page, the air was rich with the scent of pine boughs, cinnamon sticks, and the dusty vanilla aroma of old paper. The radiator, finally repaired, hummed a steady, comforting rhythm. Arthur stood on a ladder, hanging a string of warm white lights above the biography section. He paused, looking down at the space. It didn't look like a failing business anymore. It looked like a living room, a place where people wanted to be. He touched the pocket of his cardigan. Inside was a letter from his mother, the last one Mr. Samuel had given him. Build something that lasts, Arthur. The bell above the door chimed, not with the frantic energy of a customer, but with a hesitant, slow ring. Arthur climbed down. Standing on the welcome mat, shaking snow off a cheap parka, was Robert Clayton. He looked different. The white Canada Goose jacket was gone. The Bluetooth headset was gone. He looked smaller, his shoulders hunched, his face pale and unshaven. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. Arthur, Robert said, his voice raspy. He didn't step fully onto the hardwood floor. He stayed on the mat like he knew he didn't belong. I wasn't sure you'd be here. It's Christmas Eve, Robert, Arthur said, placing the string of lights on the counter. Where else would I be? Robert shifted his weight. I brought the paperwork, the transfer deeds, the bankruptcy filings. It's all signed. You own it all. The mall project is dead. Clayton Developments is dissolved. He held out a thick envelope. His hand was trembling. Arthur took the envelope. He didn't open it. He just placed it next to the register. So, Robert said, staring at his boots. I guess that's it. You won. I'm packing up my apartment tomorrow. Moving back to my parents' place in Ohio. Start over. Maybe sell cars or something. Arthur studied his old friend. He remembered the college dorm rooms, the late-night pizzas, the dreams they used to share before money became Robert's only language. He saw the defeat in Robert's eyes, absolute and crushing. Arthur could have destroyed him. He could have let Robert leave this town with nothing but debt and shame. That would be revenge. But his mother hadn't raised him for revenge. You're not going to Ohio, Robert, Arthur said. Robert looked up, confused. What? I'm starting a new division under the Rosemary Foundation, Arthur said, leaning against the counter. Affordable housing for the elderly. We're converting your failed mall site into low-income apartments for seniors like Mrs. Gable. High quality, dignified, not profit-driven. Arthur paused. I need a project manager. Someone who knows permits. Someone who knows how to push a crew. Robert's mouth opened slightly. You want to hire me? Arthur, I tried to destroy you. I stole your wife. I mocked your mother. I know, Arthur said. And you'll never forget that. That's why you'll work harder than anyone else. You'll work for a salary, a modest one. You'll report to me. And you'll build homes for people who actually need them, not monuments to your own ego. Tears welled in Robert's eyes. Real tears this time. Why? Because my mother believed in second chances, Arthur said. Even for idiots. Do you want the job or not? Robert nodded, unable to speak. He wiped his face with his sleeve. Thank you, Arthur. I won't let you down. See you Monday at 8 a.m., Arthur said. Don't be late. Robert turned and walked out into the snow, not with the swagger of a king, but with the gratitude of a survivor. Arthur locked the door behind him and turned off the main overhead lights, leaving only the soft glow of the Christmas decorations. His phone buzzed on the counter. Text message. Merry Christmas, Arthur. I'm at my parents' house. I've been thinking about us. About the mistakes of youth. I miss the way you used to read to me. Can we talk? Linda. Arthur looked at the screen. He remembered the way she had looked at him at the gala. Calculating, hungry. He remembered the funeral. He didn't feel anger anymore. He didn't feel hurt. He just felt finished. It was like finishing a book that had a bad ending. You don't keep rereading it hoping the words will change. You put it back on the shelf and pick up a new one. He didn't reply. He swiped left. Delete conversation. He put the phone away. A knock at the side door made him smile. This was the knock he was waiting for. He opened it to a gust of snowy wind and laughter. Mrs. Gable bustled in, carrying a steaming dish covered in foil. Behind her was Elias Thorne, carrying a bottle of vintage wine, and Mr. Samuel, holding a box of chocolates. Meat pie, Mrs. Gable announced. Hot from the oven. And don't you dare tell me you ate dinner already. I wouldn't dare, Arthur laughed, taking the heavy dish. We brought reinforcements, Elias said, shaking snow from his coat. And plans. I have some ideas for that reading garden you want to build behind the shop. They gathered around the small table in the back of the bookstore. They ate pie and drank wine. They laughed about the old days. Mrs. Gable told stories about Arthur's mother. How she used to sneak extra blankets to patients. How she laughed so loud it made the doctors jump. Arthur looked around the table. This wasn't the network Robert had tried to build. This wasn't a room full of people using each other. This was a family. Not by blood but by choice. To Rosemary, Mr. Samuel said, raising his glass. To Rosemary, they all echoed. Mrs. Gable reached over and patted Arthur's hand. Her eyes were wet. She's smiling right now, son. I hope you know that. She's so proud of the man you are. Arthur felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the wine. For the first time since the funeral, the heavy stone of grief in his heart felt lighter. He realized he hadn't just inherited money. He had inherited this love, this community, this purpose. The party wound down near midnight. The guests left with hugs and promises for tomorrow. Arthur was alone again, but not lonely. The store was quiet. The snow outside had covered the scars of the construction site, turning the street into a pristine white canvas. He walked to the front of the shop. He looked at the window where the eviction notice used to be. Now there was a new sign, hand-painted by Mrs. Gable. The Rosemary Community Center and Bookstore. All are welcome. He turned off the string lights. The only illumination came from the street lamps outside. Arthur sits in his favorite armchair by the window, watching the snow fall on a town he protected. He opens a book, finally free to live his own life. Arthur's journey reminds us that while money screams, true character whispers, and the richest legacy we leave behind is how we treat others when we have nothing to gain. Like the steady light in a winter storm, integrity always finds its way home, proving that the most valuable things in life are never things at all. If this story touched your spirit, please share your thoughts on true wealth in the comments below, and subscribe to Black Brilliance to help us continue shining a light on powerful stories of resilience and hope.